Silence stretched between them, heavy, loaded, impossible. Then Lorenzo's voice came out barely above a whisper, and it wasn't the crime boss speaking anymore. It was the man she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago. "Bring her to me." Serafina stared at him, unsure if he was commanding her or begging. "What would you do? Trust him with your child's life? Or protect her from him forever?" Comment below, because this decision will change everything that comes next. Sicily smelled like lemons and old stone and secrets buried so deep they'd become part of the landscape. Serafina stood on the villa's terrace, watching Alara chase butterflies through a garden that probably cost more than every apartment she'd ever lived in combined. It had been 2 weeks since Lorenzo met his daughter. 2 weeks since Serafina made the terrifying decision to let him into their lives. She'd expected demands, control, the cold efficiency of a man used to owning everything he touched. Instead, she'd watched Lorenzo sit on the floor of her tiny apartment, building block towers while Alara knocked them down, laughing like destruction was the funniest thing in the world. Again, Daddy. Again. That word. Daddy. It had taken Alara exactly 40 minutes to decide Lorenzo belonged to her. Children had that gift, seeing people for who they were, not who the world said they were. And somehow, impossibly, Lorenzo had transformed. Gentle, patient, reading bedtime stories with a voice that used to order executions. But peace never lasted in their world. The car bomb happened on their 5th night in New York. Serafina had been walking Alara to the park when Lorenzo's driver shoved them both into the back seat seconds before the explosion. The blast shattered windows 3 blocks away. If they'd been 30 seconds slower. They know, Lorenzo had said that night, his face carved from marble. They know about you. About her. You're not safe here anymore. So he'd move them. Across the ocean to his family's ancestral home in Sicily, where the DeLuca name meant something older than crime, something closer to legacy. The villa sat on a cliff overlooking the Mediterranean, surrounded by armed guards who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the walls. Serafina hated it. Hated the guards, the isolation, the way every door locked from the outside. But she couldn't deny Alara was safer here than she'd ever been in that cramped apartment with its broken heater and drug dealers in the hallway. Lorenzo had changed too. Or maybe she was just seeing him clearly for the first time. He'd wake at dawn to have breakfast with Alara. Teach her Italian words she'd mispronounce adorably. Hold her while she slept, staring at her face like he was memorizing proof that he was capable of creating something beautiful. "You're good with her," Serafina said one evening, watching him tuck Alara into bed. "I'm terrified of her." Lorenzo kissed their daughter's forehead. "Every second that I'll fail her, corrupt her, turn her into. You won't. How do you know? Because you're trying. That's more than most fathers manage." But that night, while Serafina slept, someone slid an envelope under their villa door. No sound, no warning, just a message on expensive paper written in blood-red ink. Lorenzo found it at dawn. "Read it." And Serafina watched all the warmth drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper. 5 words. "The blood never forgets, cousin. Comment justice if you think the past always comes with a price. Because Marcos found them, and the real war is about to begin. Redemption tastes like salt water and second chances." Serafina learned this watching Lorenzo dismantle his empire piece by piece, sitting at a desk overlooking the sea, making phone calls that ended operations, dissolved partnerships, returned territory to rivals without bloodshed. "What are you doing?" she'd asked after the first week. "Changing." He'd said it simply, like it was obvious. You can't raise a daughter in a house built on corpses. But changing wasn't simple. Every deal he dissolved created enemies. Every territory he returned created suspicion. Men who'd respected him started questioning. His own soldiers whispered about weakness, about a boss who'd gone soft because of a woman and a child. Lorenzo didn't care. Or maybe he cared too much about the wrong things now. Bedtime stories instead of body counts, Alara's laughter instead of quarterly profits. Serafina started seeing the man behind the myth. He'd wake at 3 a.m. sometimes, drenched in sweat, nightmares clawing at his sleep. She'd find him on the terrace, staring at the dark water like it held answers. My father died because of betrayal, he told her one night. Marco, my cousin, he shot him during a peace meeting. Made it look like a rival family. I spent 2 years hunting the wrong people before I learned the truth. By then, Marco had consolidated power. Turned half my soldiers against me. I had to rebuild everything just to survive. Why didn't you kill him? Because that's what he expected. What he wanted. Another cycle of blood. Instead, I'm doing something worse. I'm proving him wrong. Proving you can leave this life and still breathe. She'd studied his face in the moonlight. You're dismantling your empire for her. For Alara. For all of us. He turned to her then, and she'd seen something she'd never seen before. Hope. I thought power could heal me after my father died. Instead, it made me a ghost. Hollow. Going through motions but not living. Then stop being one, Serafina had whispered. The next morning, Lorenzo handed her a sealed envelope. Heavy. Official. Evidence. Everything Marco's done. Murders, corruption, trafficking routes. Enough to put him away for life. Why give this to me? Because if I die, he touched her face gently. You give this to the police. Not my people. Real police. The ones who still care about justice. You make sure Alara grows up knowing her father tried to be better. Serafina had taken the envelope with trembling hands. You're scaring me. Good. Fear means you'll be careful. And we need careful now more than ever. That night, Alara asked Lorenzo to read her favorite story. The one about the dragon who learned to breathe flowers instead of fire. Serafina listened from the doorway, watching this dangerous man make silly voices for a 2-year-old who giggled like the world was safe. But the world wasn't safe. Redemption had a price, and Marco was coming to collect. Lorenzo knew it, had known it since that blood-red message slid under their door. He'd tripled security, moved their bedrooms to the villa's interior, started sleeping with a gun under his pillow. We could run, Serafina suggested. Disappear. Start over somewhere he'd never find us. Lorenzo had pulled her close. Running means he wins. Means Alara grows up afraid, always looking over her shoulder. I won't give her that life. Then what will you give her? He'd kissed her forehead. A father worth remembering. Would you trust someone who once destroyed you to protect you now? Hit subscribe, because the next chapter will test everything they've built, and not everyone will survive it. The attack came at midnight when even the guards were half dreaming. 6 men, armed, moving through the villa like smoke, disabling security, cutting power, turning their fortress into a trap. Serafina woke to gunfire and Lorenzo's hand over her mouth. Stay quiet. Don't move. He was gone before she could respond, disappearing into darkness with nothing but the gun he'd kept hidden and 3 years of instinct that violence bred into men who survived his world. Serafina grabbed Alara, who was crying now, terrified by the sounds of breaking glass and shouting voices. She pressed into the corner of the closet. Lorenzo's instructions, rehearsed but never believed, and held her daughter close, whispering that everything would be okay, even though she had no idea if that was true. The gunfire intensified. Someone screamed. Footsteps thundered past their room. And then silence. The kind that's worse than noise, because you don't know if it means safety or death. The door burst open. Serafina's heart stopped. But it was Lorenzo, bleeding from his shoulder, face pale but alive. We're leaving. Now. They moved fast. Down the servants' stairs. Through the kitchen where 2 of Marco's men lay unconscious. Out into the garden where more gunfire erupted. Bullets chewing through lemon trees and ancient stone. Lorenzo shielded them with his body, returning fire with his left hand, his right arm useless and bleeding. They made it to the garage, to the car, almost safe. Then Marco stepped out of the shadows. Cousin, his smile was cruel. You've made this so much harder than it needed to be. All you had to do was die quietly. Instead, you embarrass me. Dismantle what our family's built. For what? A woman and a bastard child? Lorenzo pushed Serafina and Alara behind him. They're not part of this. Everything's part of this. You taught me that. Remember? When you executed Paolo for betraying the family. When you burned down that nightclub because someone looked at you wrong. You don't get to play father now and pretend the blood washes off. You're right. Lorenzo's voice was steady despite the blood soaking his shirt. I was a monster, but monsters can change. You're proof they can get worse. Marco raised his gun. Time crystallized. Serafina saw everything in slow motion. Ilara's terrified face, Lorenzo's acceptance of death, the gun's barrel catching moonlight. She moved without thinking, grabbed the fallen weapon near her feet, raised it, fired. The shot caught Marco in the leg. He went down screaming. His men scattered, caught between covering their boss and returning fire. In that chaos, Lorenzo got them to the car, engine roaring to life, tires screaming as they fled down the mountain road. Behind them, sirens wailed. Someone had called the police, maybe the neighbors, maybe Lorenzo's allies, maybe God himself had decided enough was enough. Lorenzo drove, one-handed, bleeding, barely conscious. Serafina pressed her jacket against his wound, praying to deities she didn't believe in. Ilara sobbed in the back seat, traumatized but alive. They made it to the hospital. Lorenzo collapsed in the emergency bay. Police surrounded them immediately, guns drawn, shouting questions Serafina couldn't process. An officer pulled her aside. "Ma'am, do you know who this man is? What he's done?" Serafina looked at Lorenzo being wheeled away, at their daughter crying for her daddy, at the blood on her hands that might save them or destroy them. "Yes," she said quietly. "He's someone who learned to pray. If you believe in second chances, drop a comment. Turn on notifications because the final chapter will show you whether redemption is real or just another beautiful lie we tell ourselves." 6 months later, Lorenzo walked again. Not like before. The bullet had done permanent damage, left him with a limp that would never quite heal. But he walked, testified, gave prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle not just Marco's operation, but the entire network of corruption that had rotted New York's underbelly for generations. Marco got life without parole. 17 of his associates followed. The DeLuca empire, what remained of it, was dissolved, assets seized, blood money turned into restitution for victims Serafina would never meet, but whose pain she understood now in ways she wished she didn't. Lorenzo could have negotiated immunity. His lawyers said he had leverage. Instead, he pled guilty to everything he'd actually done, took responsibility, served 18 months in minimum security, a joke sentence considering his crimes, but the prosecutors wanted his testimony more than his imprisonment. Serafina visited every week, bringing Ilara when the guards allowed it. Watch her daughter press her palm against the glass. Watch Lorenzo press back, this broken man learning what it meant to be a father through barriers and consequences. He was different when he got out. Quieter. Older somehow, though not that much time had passed. He'd used prison to finish his college degree, the one he'd abandoned when his father died. Studied social work of all things. Made plans that sounded impossible until you remembered he'd built an empire from nothing. Building something good couldn't be harder than building something evil. They didn't get married. Serafina refused, said marriage was for people who started clean, and they'd never be clean. But they built something better than marriage, partnership, the kind forged in gunfire and second chances. Lorenzo opened a foundation in Ilara's name, helped families escape organized crime, offer protection, legal aid, therapy for children who'd watched their parents become monsters. He worked 16-hour days, pouring himself into redemption the same way he'd once poured himself into revenge. Serafina went back to music, started teaching voice lessons to kids in the Bronx, the ones who reminded her of herself, broke, hungry, clinging to dreams like life rafts. She sang again, her voice rusty at first, but growing stronger, learning that surviving didn't mean forgetting how to live. Ilara grew up knowing exactly who her father was and what he'd done. They didn't lie to her, didn't sugarcoat, just told her the truth, that people could be terrible and wonderful, sometimes in the same breath, and the measure of a person wasn't their worst moment, but what they did with every moment after. Tonight, Serafina stood at the window of La Sera Rosa, the restaurant where this all began. It had new owners now, legitimate ones. She'd stopped in for old times' sake, remembering the girl who'd served champagne while hiding the world's biggest secret. The city lights reflected like forgiveness itself. Not absolution, because some things couldn't be absolved, but acceptance that yesterday's monsters could become today's teachers. Her phone buzzed. A photo from Lorenzo, Alara at the Foundation's new community center, painting a mural with kids whose fathers were serving time for crimes that sounded familiar. She was smiling, covered in paint, radiant. The caption read, "She asked if I'm a hero. What did you tell her?" Serafina typed back, "The truth. That you're trying to be." And maybe that was enough. Not redemption exactly. Not forgiveness for everything broken. Just the quiet acknowledgement that love, real love, didn't erase the past. It carried the weight of it and chose to keep walking anyway. Alara looked up at the stars in the photo, pointing at constellations Lorenzo had taught her. Serafina imagined her asking, "Mommy, is Daddy a hero?" And somewhere in that question lived every complicated truth about human beings, that we're all heroes and villains, light and shadow, destruction and hope wrapped together like DNA strands. Lorenzo De Luca hadn't asked to own his daughter. He'd asked for permission to know her, to be present, to prove that even the darkest hearts could learn to beat differently. And in the end, maybe that's all any of us can do. Show up. Try. Choose love over fear. Build something beautiful from the wreckage. The city stretched out before Serafina, full of stories she'd never know, lives intersecting in ways that seemed random but maybe weren't. She thought about the girl she'd been, broke, scared, helping a bleeding stranger in the rain because it was the right thing to do. She'd save his life that night, and somehow, years later, he'd saved hers right back, not through power or money or protection, but through the simple radical act of becoming better. He wasn't asking to own her. Walter Deacon's voice whispered through her memory. He was asking for a chance to rewrite his ending. And maybe, just maybe, he'd done exactly that. If you believe love can change even the darkest heart, share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about redemption, courage, and the beautiful mess of being human. Drop a comment about second chances, yours, someone else's, or the ones you're still hoping for. Turn on notifications because next week, we're telling another story that'll remind you why even broken people deserve to try again. And if this story touched you, if it made you think or feel or remember that transformation is possible, share it. Because somebody out there needs to hear that their past doesn't have to write their future. Thank you for being part of this family. Until next time, remember, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through forgiveness, through love, and through a single sentence that changes everything. Good night and God bless. The bullet wasn't meant for me. I watched it slice through the rain-soaked air, 6 feet from where I stood frozen behind the kitchen door of La Sera Rosa, Manhattan's most dangerous restaurant disguised as its most elegant. The man who took it, tall, bleeding, furious, looked right at me as he fell. And in that split second, I made the worst decision of my life. I helped him. My name is Walter Deacon, and I've spent 40 years watching people make choices that carve their names into history, or their graves into forgotten earth. This story? It's both. Because the man bleeding on that sidewalk 3 years ago was Lorenzo De Luca, heir to New York's oldest Italian crime family. And the woman who saved him, who bandaged his wounds with trembling hands and asked no questions, was a music student named Serafina Vale. She had no idea she'd just changed the course of her entire life. Fast forward to now. Serafina's 26, working double shifts at the same restaurant where Manhattan's elite wash down caviar with champagne and secrets. She smiles through exhaustion, pours wine with steady hands, and prays every single night that no one discovers what she's hiding 3 blocks away in a rent-controlled apartment with peeling wallpaper and a broken heater. A daughter, 2 years old, named Alara. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. See, Serafina never told Lorenzo about the baby. How could she? The man disappeared like smoke the morning after she gave him everything. Her trust, her body, her foolish, reckless heart. She woke up to cold sheets and the kind of silence that screams abandonment. No note, no explanation, just gone. So she did what survivors do. She adapted, worked 3 jobs while pregnant, delivered Alara alone in a county hospital at 2 in the morning, and built a life from duct tape and determination. Her neighbor, Mrs. Klein, 74, half-deaf, heart of gold, watches Alara during Serafina's shifts. It's not perfect, it's barely functional, but it's safe. Or it was. Until tonight. Serafina's wiping down tables in the empty restaurant, humming something her daughter loves, when the kitchen radio crackles to life. Static, then a voice. Low, familiar, impossible. Serafina Vale, or should I say DeLuca? The cloth drops from her hand. Her heart stops beating for what feels like 3 full seconds. Because that voice belongs to a ghost. To a man who should have no idea she exists. No idea about the little girl with his dark eyes and her gentle smile. The radio goes silent, but the damage is done. Someone knows. Someone's been watching. And in Lorenzo DeLuca's world, secrets don't just come to light. They explode. If you've ever hidden something to protect someone you love, drop a heart in the comments. Because Serafina's secret, it's about to detonate her entire world. 3 years earlier, Serafina was nobody. Just another broke music student in a city that chewed up dreamers and spit out cynics. She worked nights at a coffee shop near Lincoln Center, survived on ramen and ambition, and told herself that someday, her voice would matter. Then came the storm. October. Rain like bullets. Serafina was walking home from a late shift when she heard it. Metal screaming against asphalt, glass shattering, then silence. The kind of silence that comes right before someone dies. A black Maserati had wrapped itself around a lamppost 2 blocks from the Opera House. Smoke poured from the hood. Most people would have called 911 and kept walking. Not Serafina. She ran toward the wreckage like an idiot, because that's what good people do. They run toward danger when someone needs help. The driver was conscious. Barely. Blood streaked down his temple, his white shirt torn and stained crimson. But his eyes, his eyes were alert, furious, alive. He looked at her like she was the last person on earth he wanted to see him vulnerable. Don't, he growled. Don't call anyone. She should have ignored him. Should have dialed 911 anyway. Instead, she helped him out of the car, let him lean his considerable weight against her small frame, and half-carried him to her apartment 6 blocks away. Why? She still doesn't know. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not through her, but at her like she actually existed. She cleaned his wounds with shaking hands. He never flinched, never explained, just watched her with those dark eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her face, memorizing her like she was a poem he'd need to recite later. You're not afraid of me, he said finally. Should I be? He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Most people are. That night stretched into dawn. They talked, not about who he was or what he did. He deflected those questions with the skill of someone practiced in lying. But they talked about music, about the opera playing the night of the crash, about whether Puccini understood heartbreak or just knew how to sell it. When he left 3 days later, she thought she'd imagined the whole thing. A fever dream born from loneliness and bad decisions. Except he came back. Again and again. Meetings turned into dinners. Dinners turned into nights she'd remember for the rest of her life. She fell in love with a man whose last name she didn't even know. Then one morning, he was gone. Vanished like he'd never existed. No motivo, no explanation. Just empty space where he used to be and a heart that wouldn't stop breaking. 6 weeks later, she stared at a pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom, watching 2 pink lines appear like a verdict. That's when she realized love had left something behind. Have you ever loved someone dangerous, yet couldn't stop? Tell me what you'd do in her place, because Serafina's choice changed everything. They say babies cry for attention, but Alara cried like she understood the world was dangerous and wanted her mother to know she was still alive. Serafina named her after the brightest moon phase she'd seen during her pregnancy. Full, luminous, impossible to ignore. She gave birth alone in a county hospital at 2:47 in the morning, No family in the waiting room. No hand to hold through the contractions that felt like her body was tearing itself apart. The nurse asked for the father's name. Serafina left it blank. What was she supposed to write? Lorenzo? She didn't even know his last name back then. Didn't know he was the heir to New York's most feared crime family. Didn't know his father controlled half the city's underground economy, or that his name alone could make grown men confess to crimes they didn't commit. She just knew he was gone, and she was alone, and this tiny screaming creature was now her entire universe. The first year was survival mode. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep. Mrs. Klein from 3B watching Alara during the worst shifts, refusing payment, saying things like, "I raised 5 kids, sweetheart. One more won't kill me." Serafina learned to function on coffee and adrenaline, to smile through exhaustion, to pray that Alara's frequent colds were just colds and not something she couldn't afford to treat. Every time Alara laughed, Serafina heard Lorenzo's voice. Every thunderstorm reminded her of that night. The universe had a cruel sense of humor, giving her a daughter with his dark eyes, his stubborn chin, his way of looking at things like he was solving a puzzle no one else could see. But she vowed Alara would never inherit that darkness, would never know what her father was, would grow up normal, safe, loved. Then came a job offer at La Sera Rosa. Serafina needed better money. The restaurant paid 3 times what she made anywhere else. She didn't ask questions, didn't research the owners. Just showed up, smiled pretty, and learned to navigate a dining room where politicians sat next to criminals and everyone pretended they were just there for the pasta. She didn't know she'd walk straight into Lorenzo's empire. Didn't know the restaurant was a front, a beautiful facade hiding meetings where men decided who lived and who disappeared. She just needed to feed her daughter and keep the lights on. Then one Tuesday morning, a delivery came to her apartment. No return address, just a manila envelope with a wax seal, a serpent eating its own tail. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, a single photograph. Alara, taken yesterday at the park, playing on the swings, unaware she was being watched. On the back, written in elegant script, "Beautiful child, looks just like her father." Serafina's blood turned to ice. Had the past found her again? If you believe no secret stays buried forever, hit that like button. Because someone's been watching, and Serafina's about to learn that running from the truth only makes it chase you faster. Lorenzo DeLuca hadn't slept properly in 3 years. People assumed it was the business, the late-night meetings, the constant threat of betrayal, the weight of an empire built on fear and carefully negotiated violence. But Lorenzo knew the truth. He couldn't sleep because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, laughing in the rain, cleaning his wounds with gentle hands, looking at him like he was human instead of monster. After his father's murder, a bullet through the skull, delivered by his own cousin Marco during a supposed peace negotiation, Lorenzo rebuilt everything. Colder, harder, more ruthless than his father ever dreamed. He eliminated enemies with surgical precision, expanded operations into legitimate businesses, made the DeLuca name synonymous with untouchable. But none of it filled the void. He'd searched for her, hired private investigators who came back with dead ends and wrong addresses. The coffee shop where she worked had closed, her apartment abandoned. It was like she'd evaporated into the city's endless crowds, taking his one human moment with her. So he buried himself in work, built walls so high even he couldn't see over them, told himself she was better off without him anyway. What kind of life could he offer? What kind of father would he make? Then came last Tuesday, his new restaurant manager, a man named Vince who'd proven useful for his attention to detail, mentioned something during their weekly meeting. Got a new server who's incredible, works harder than anyone I've seen, goes by Seraph Vale, quiet, keeps to herself, but the customers love her. Lorenzo barely registered it, just another employee in another business. Until Vince added, she's got this way of looking at people, like she really sees them, you know? Something in Lorenzo's chest tightened. "Show me your file." Vince seemed confused but complied, pulled up the employee records on his tablet, turned it around. And there she was, older, tired, hair pulled back instead of falling loose around her shoulders. but unmistakably, impossibly her. Serafina. Lorenzo stared at that photograph for 10 full minutes. Vince had stopped talking. The office had gone silent, except for the clock ticking on the wall, each second marking the distance between who Lorenzo was and who he used to be. Sir, Vince finally ventured. You all right? Lorenzo closed the tablet, stood, walked to the window overlooking the city that feared him. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Schedule the annual gala for Saturday. Make sure she's working it. Vince nodded, sensing something had shifted, something dangerous and inevitable. For the first time in 3 years, Lorenzo DeLuca smiled. Would you face the past if it meant finding the only person who ever saw the real you? Drop a comment, because Lorenzo's about to walk through a door that can't be closed again. The restaurant glowed like a museum at midnight. All gold fixtures and crystal chandeliers, and tables set for people who measured worth in power instead of money. Serafina moved through it like a ghost, carrying champagne and canapes, smiling at men who looked through her and women who looked past her. She perfected the art of being invisible. In a room full of predators, invisibility meant survival. She didn't know tonight was different. Didn't know the guest list had been carefully curated. Certain people invited, others mysteriously uninvited. Didn't know that every detail, from the music to the lighting to her shift assignment, had been orchestrated by someone who'd spent 3 years searching for her face in crowds. The doors opened at 8. Politicians, lawyers, men in suits that cost more than her yearly rent. She served them with practiced efficiency, her mind already on the clock, on getting home to Alara, on pretending this world wasn't real. Then he walked in. The room didn't go silent. That only happens in movies. But something shifted. Conversations paused mid-sentence. People straightened. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees as Lorenzo DeLuca moved through the restaurant like a king inspecting his kingdom. Serafina was at the bar, her back to the entrance, when she felt it. That electric charge that happens when someone's staring at you with enough intensity to burn holes through your spine. She turned. Their eyes met across 30 feet of imported marble and terrified rich people. Her tray slipped. Crystal shattered. Champagne spread across the floor like spilled secrets. And in that moment, Serafina understood. The photograph, the surveillance, the voice on the radio. It had all been leading here. To him. Lorenzo moved toward her with the measured pace of someone who'd already won. People parted. Conversations died. By the time he reached her, the entire restaurant had gone silent. Everyone watching this collision of past and present. Everyone out, Lorenzo said quietly. It wasn't a request. Within 3 minutes, the restaurant emptied. Staff, guests, everyone disappearing like roaches when lights turn on. The manager locked the doors from outside. And then it was just them. 3 years of silence. 3 years of questions. 3 years of a life built on lies standing between them. Lorenzo studied her face like he was memorizing it all over again. You thought you could hide from me, Serafina? She stood frozen, fragments of crystal glittering around her feet like fallen stars. If your past walked through the door right now, would you face it or run? Comment below, because Serafina's about to discover that some conversations can't be avoided, only survived. You lied to me. Lorenzo's voice was quiet, but Serafina heard the razor blade hidden in those 3 words. Not anger exactly. Something worse. Betrayal. She forced herself to meet his eyes. You left. What was I supposed to do? Chase after a ghost. You were supposed to tell me. He moved closer, each step deliberate. I searched for you. Paid people. Turned this city inside out trying to find you. And you were here, working in my restaurant. Walking past my life like I meant nothing. You meant everything. The words escaped before she could stop them. That's why I couldn't tell you. Lorenzo stopped. Something flickered across his face, confusion, maybe pain. That makes no sense, doesn't it? Serafina's hands trembled. She clasped them together, trying to steady herself. You disappeared, Lorenzo. Woke up one morning and you were gone. No explanation. No would-be. Just empty space where you used to be. So I did what people do when they're abandoned. I survived. I left because staying would have gotten you killed. His voice cracked on the last word. My father was murdered 2 days before. His own blood. I couldn't. I wouldn't let them use you as leverage. Leaving you alive meant leaving you alone. The confession hung between them like smoke. Serafina felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. This was the conversation she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her head, but none of those imaginary versions had included this. The rawness in his voice, the way his hands shook slightly at his sides. You still should have told me, he said softer now. Whatever happened after, whatever you went through, I deserve to know. Know what? But even as she said it, she knew. Could see it in his eyes. He'd done his research. Knew about the apartment, the jobs, Mrs. Klein. Maybe even about the child, Serafina. The words landed like a physical blow. Her breath caught. The restaurant seemed to tilt sideways. How? You think I'd find you and not look deeper? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. I've known for 3 days. Been trying to figure out if it's true, if she's mine, if you've been raising my daughter 3 blocks away, while he stopped. Turned away. A daughter. Serafina felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Yes. Her name is Alara. She's 2, and she's everything good that ever came from us. Everything pure that you and I could never be. Let me see her. No. Lorenzo spun back around. That's not a request. And that's not your decision. Serafina stood straighter, found steel in her spine she didn't know existed. You're a dangerous man, Lorenzo. You've built an empire on fear and violence and things I don't even want to imagine. I won't let that touch her. I won't let your world swallow what's left of mine.